Hello and welcome to the podcast, the first recording that I've done in about 12 months, so I'm really excited. So as always, I'll get you to introduce yourself and then we'll crack on with your story.
Cool. So I'm Ruby. I am 30, almost 31.
You have
Feeling
to think of that.
very old. I do have to think of it actually. Once I've hit 25, I feel like it all just kind of starts blurring.
Yeah.
And I have 3 kiddos. So I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1.5-year-old.
Yeah, cute.
Yes. And today I'm going to be telling my story about growing up with a parent that had a severe mental illness, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, which a lot of people know what that is, but not really understand what it actually means, because it was a very popular thing to say that you can be OCD about something by just having some tendencies that might make you want to have things in order, and it's not the case when you actually have a person that you live with that is diagnosed with it. It is a completely different kind of ball game, and
It's debilitating to a certain extent.
Yes, and I can have some. I have a letter that my mum wrote when I was 15, so I don't know. I'd have to do the math to figure out how old she was, but it was after she'd been diagnosed for a while. She was very late diagnosed. She was already in her late 30s by the time she was diagnosed, so she lived with it for a long time before she actually got around to investigating what it actually was.
Is your mum still...
No.
Okay.
So she passed away, but not related to her illness. Just
Okay.
She's passed away.
Timing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry if you hear my baby in the background. He is running around.
Yeah, that's fine. We have another one with a baby in the background.
Okay,
They
cool.
kind of adds.
Great. So do I just dive in?
Yeah. Start from the beginning.
Well, essentially, I was raised by my grandparents. So, and I knew this story growing up because it was told to me by them and by my mum. Like, I had a good relationship with my parents. So, yes, I was aware that it was not normal to be raised by your grandparents, but I saw my parents a lot. But essentially, I lived with my grandparents from the age of 5 months old until I turned 6, and they were not young grandparents. They were 70s when they took me on as a 5-month-old baby. And as I said, I knew the story growing up, and my sister lived with my parents and I lived with my grandparents. But in around maybe 2021, I actually found, my friend's mum gave me a book that my mum had given to her, and it had this letter in it that I had never read. I'd heard about it, like I'd heard my mum talking about it, but I'd never actually read it myself. So I read it, which was horrible to read because it was kind of like reading about myself, but then not being able to discuss it because my mum passed away. So
was it a letter to you or just a letter?
No, it was a letter that she actually wrote for other sufferers that the doctor would then give to people that came in and like presented with the same symptoms to kind of, I don't know, give them hope or give them understanding of what they were kind of dealing with.
Less isolated maybe?
It was, the letter was really like saying exactly what she was suffering and how she felt. Suicide was her only option many times, and that the doctor, she went eventually at my dad's insistence because I almost died from her mental illness, which is why my grandparents raised me. So at the age of 5 months, she took me to the doctor, which is still a doctor that I see today, and I take my kids to. So if he ever retires, I don't know what I will do, because he saved my life and he probably saved her life. But I went at 5 months old.
So do you have an older sibling? You said you have a sister and she's older?
She's 2 years older than me.
Okay, yeah.
And she... as far as I can read in the letter, she was actually looked after a lot by my grandparents as well. But then when they took me on, she kind of went home to them.
Yeah, okay.
But in my memory, she always lived with my mum and dad. So I don't really remember. I can probably trust the letter more than my own memory though.
Yeah. So sorry, you were saying at 5 months
she took me to the doctor because I didn't appear to be growing. And he discovered that I was basically starving to death. And my mum did tell me this, like growing up, she would tell me like I was starving and like Nanny and Papa had to take me on because I was not thriving in that. But then reading the letter, she wrote about how she couldn't bear to touch me because I was contaminated, and she would beg my dad to feed me water instead of her being able to touch me. So she just wasn't feeding me. She said she would spend hours every day like cleaning, and they wouldn't be able to make food because she couldn't bear to bring like fruits, vegetables into the house. She had to wash all the ingredients that she brought in, like really, really debilitating. And so when she went to the doctor, she actually didn't tell him why I was like that. So he prescribed formula, and as far as I can gather, she couldn't bear the thought of taking formula into the house. So she chose to give me to be raised by my grandparents because she couldn't stand the idea of having to deal with another like thing to bring into the house, I guess.
That's so tough.
Yeah, and like it was hard to read that because I'd always known that it didn't seem weird to me growing up because it was just what it was for me. Like I lived with Nanny and Papa, I went home on the weekends, and that was just how it was. But then like once I'd had my own children, I was like, I can't imagine giving your own baby up. And like she was choosing that over me in a way, but I can also understand that she wasn't able to help it. So eventually after that happened, she went back to that doctor and said like, this is what I'm dealing with, and he sent her to a psychiatrist, and then finally got given the diagnosis, I believe, and then she read a book about it, and that really like helped her understand like what was actually going on. And then she was in therapy for many years until I was able to go home at the age of 6 when I think I was almost in grade 2 when I went home. But from her letter it says I didn't want to go home any earlier, which I don't remember if that was true or not, but yeah, so I don't have any memories of my parents until after the age of school starting. Like I can only remember being like very vague ones of being in their house, but like none of playing with them or anything like that. So, but I only remember my Nanny and Papa. So that was kind of my early life. And then I said to you before we started, like a lot of people will talk about OCD, and I have OCD, and like I said, I didn't talk about it when I was younger because people would say like, oh yeah, I have that, or like, yeah, it's like that for me. But like as a child growing up, I think I missed a lot of the things that my sister probably has to deal with more in her adult life because I wasn't exposed to it. So in some ways it was probably like almost better for me to be raised out of that environment, because my sister definitely has more like tendencies around cleanliness and stuff like that. But because we're both so aware of it, we both kind of like refuse to be controlled by it. But she's definitely more like germophobic than I am. But when I moved home, like we weren't allowed friends over. We weren't allowed, if we went out of the house, we had to have a shower. Even if we just stepped one foot out of the front door, we had to go back in and have a shower. Wow. We weren't allowed to get dressed in the house. Our clothes were in the garage, and like in winter, that was just like hell.
Oh my goodness.
It was like that up until high school. Like all through primary school, we never had anyone come into the house ever. Like people did not come into her house.
Could you go to friends' houses and then come home and have a shower and go through the process?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time at Georgia's house. So you know Georgia, our friend. Yeah, so I like spent a lot of my childhood there, and her mum would take me in, which was really nice. But we always felt like we were missing out, like not being able to have sleepovers and stuff. But that was just how it was. And it was hard growing up in that kind of like, it was a very, very controlling environment. And if we tried to do, you know, something that we weren't allowed to, it would be like hysteria, like
from your mum.
Yeah, like she could not deal with it, or like even just like schoolwork, like we couldn't bring our school books into the house. So like we weren't ever allowed to take things in from home to school either. So we were never allowed to like show and tell, or like if we were doing some kind of project, we couldn't bring stuff from home to do. So it was hard.
How was your dad? Obviously they stayed together.
Yeah, they did. He never seemed, he did a lot of the housework. I do remember that. Like he would do the mopping on the weekends, and he would do the folding and the washing and that kind of thing. But he went to work and he came home. And
do you remember if like she would get hysterical if he
I can't remember that as much. No. But it was almost like before she was diagnosed, she was so focused on the cleaning. Everything was spotless. It merged into being afraid to tackle it, and it actually merged into going the other way. And if Dad didn't do it, like we were going to live in dirt and squalor because she was too afraid to clean it. She spent a lot of time in bed, like from the age of grade 3 when I moved home. So I was around 7. I can't remember. I moved home and we went to school. Francis and I would pack our own lunch boxes, and it would just be we were 7 and 9, and it would just be like packaged stuff, like never fruit, vegetables, nothing. And we would just put it in our lunchbox, make our own breakfast, wake her up to say goodbye, walk to school. We'd walk home from school, she'd still be in bed. She'd get up, do the dishes, go back to bed. Like she would spend so much time in bed. Wow. And that was all through childhood like that. And then it was only once I got into high school that I think she really kind of made some like improvement, and I don't know what brought that on. Because I don't remember her changing medication. She was on 15 pills a day. I do remember that because I'd always think it was funny that she's in the food court, like popping like 15 pills.
Yeah,
I'm like, what are people
just on the
thinking
table.
about
Yeah.
that? Yeah. So she was on a lot of medication, but she did get better, which was unfortunate that she died because it was the best she had ever been in her whole life and enjoying life. And then she had like a heart attack, like a bit. And
How long was that period?
I was 21, so I was like 13 when she, so yeah, 8 years or so. We went overseas twice, and that was really good.
Wow, that's a
because they used to travel a lot. Like before they had kids, they traveled a lot.
Yeah,
and I don't really understand how that matched up with her illness.
Yeah,
because I don't know how she would have coped with that, but they did. They traveled a lot, and then they didn't for a long time when we came along. Money was probably also an issue, but yeah. And then we went overseas, and she was doing really good again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a terrible way to kind of grow up with that kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you know what her trigger was? So for some people,
like there was multiple things.
Okay.
So, and like my nanny and papa, they would tell me it was from 2 years old. Like she was, like she was particular about things, and it just got worse and worse into her adult life.
Yeah.
But it was cleanliness, it was counting, and it was repetitive motions, that kind of thing. So she would always like be like in the air, like, and I just knew she was counting something. I don't know what she was counting, or she would always have to like check the lights multiple times and that kind of thing. And actually when I was 14, we had moved out with my nanny again. So my sister and I actually left and moved in with our nanny after my grandpa.
Voluntarily?
Yeah, my grandpa passed away.
Yeah.
So we moved her close to us because she lived in North Brisbane.
Yeah, okay.
And got her like a rental house with 2 bedrooms. And we were old enough, we were like, we'll live it, because the house was too cramped to bring another person in. And we were very independent because we had to be. So we lived with nanny. And I got really obsessive with checking things, and I like recognized that in myself after a while, and I was like, no, I'm not doing this. Like I refuse, and I forced myself to stop because I knew the signs of it. So and so it is because it is genetic. Like you can have,
is it?
Yeah, you can have the genetic disposal to like predisposal to have it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we were always very aware that we didn't want to kind of go down the same path. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a chemical imbalance in the brain.
It is, yeah. Okay.
And so that was just her life, and it was hard growing up because she wasn't shy about telling us that she felt like she would commit suicide, or she would tell us how she would imagine doing it. Like she would be like, I just imagine throwing myself into the train tracks to escape, like that kind of thing.
How traumatic for you.
And
God.
It really sucks because that is like built into my brain. So if I'm having a hard day with kids, like my first thought is like, oh, I just want to like die right now. And I hate thinking that because I don't want to, but it's like hardwired into me. That was like her coping mechanism. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't want to do it, but it happens. And now I'm like really like, I think both my sister and I are so terrified of putting our kids through anything. Yeah. That we're just so like hyper aware of not wanting to be bad parents that we're probably like overcompensating, but it is what it is. Like you can't avoid that kind of thing when you grow up in that kind of environment. Yeah. And it just generational trauma, isn't it? You'll do something that your kids, and everyone's got it. Everyone's got certain generational, and we had like, it sounds very doom and gloom. We had a great childhood. Like I don't look back on my childhood and think I missed out on things. Like to me, I had like my nanny and papa, I had my mum and dad, and like once I went home, we did heaps of stuff. Like we went places on holidays, we saw movies, like we did all of those things. And then in the letter that my mum wrote, she would say she dreaded taking us to the shops because it was just a nightmare. And I never realised that she would have been really struggling with that, because I knew she struggled with things, but I was like, yeah, we go to the shops, we go to the movies and stuff. But she said it was like her own personal hell, and like we were begged to go to the parks, and she couldn't take us to parks because she was scared a dog would have like done a poo and we would step in it or something like that. So it's like so like sad thinking back to it, because I'm like, we had a great childhood, but I'm like, did she hate it? Or but even worse is I can't even discuss it with her. Yeah, which really there's no closure. Yeah, there's no closure. It just sucks. Yeah.
Sounds like, obviously, only from an outsider, from what you've said in 10, 20 minutes, like, she sounded like she had lots of love, though. Yeah. Pushing through all of those things.
She was a good mum. And, like, we never wanted anything. Like, we never went without. Like
Yeah.
my grandpa obviously helped financially because she never worked. Like she could not work. So like my dad worked, and then my grandpa and grandma, they're all English. They migrated here in the year before I was born. So there's something called the British pension that they pay any
my
British
grandma
people.
gets it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I don't know how it works either, but I do know what you're talking about.
My grandparents got both the Australian pension and the British pension, so they had no money issues. So we never went without. Like we always had birthday parties, and we probably overcompensated. We had heaps of toys to play with. Like we were never bored. We were just like housebound. Unless we were going out, and then we were out. Like we never played in the garden. Like we never played outside. We never played in the garden. If we went out, we went like to somewhere. Yeah. And then we would come home and have a shower and that kind of thing. Yeah. So it was a very like controlled lifestyle, which I think brings up a lot of stuff with my kids. And I did go to therapy about this because like when my kids were really young, I would be so anxious that they're going to grow up and hate me. And then the therapist was like, that is years away. Why are you stressed about this? I'm like, I just am. Like I can't help it. But like Josh and my sister's husband are like, you spoil them. I'm like, I can't help it. Like, we just want them to have everything. We want them to have the world. So that's probably because we never went without. Like, we got whatever we wanted. Yeah. And that was just the overcompensation for not having a regular childhood, I guess.
Yeah, and not being able to have closure.
Yeah.
That would be that I think I would be really struggle with.
Yeah. And it's annoying because when she was still alive, like, there was never a need to talk about it because we all lived through it together and she was getting better.
Yeah.
So we never really discussed it because there was, like, we obviously didn't know we had limited time.
That's it.
None of us had kids yet. So we were just getting older all together. We were doing stuff as a family. Like, it was getting really good. But then my sister and I both agree, since we've had kids, it's like so much worse because there's so many things you wish you could talk to them about. Yeah. And like, my dad is still around, but he's 80. He just doesn't remember. Like, you can ask him questions and he's just like, I don't know.
Like 30 years ago.
It's like and he was an old dad, obviously. Like,
was your mum an old mum?
She was 12 years younger than Dad.
That's a big gap.
But she was 37 when she had me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she lived 37 years of her life with this undiagnosed illness that she didn't understand what was happening to her. She just knew that she was going crazy. So,
that would be so. Mental illness was different then.
Yeah.
Yeah. What type of mum now? You've been to therapy. You've probably had some coping mechanisms and things. What type of mum would you describe yourself as now then?
I think I'm obviously much more aware of just my own self and my own reactions and that kind of thing. I think I'm probably, like, I would say relaxed. I would definitely describe you as relaxed. I haven't seen you parent lots, but... Yeah. I don't know, like, I do... Oh, thank you. I do not want to eat a veggie straw. You eat it for you. Thank you. I don't sweat the small stuff. Like, if they... Like, not so much here because we're renting this house, so I'm a bit more, like, cautious about what I allow them to do.
That would be like
it's a bit more stressful.
Well, not any,
but
most.
In our old house, which we own, like, I would let them do messy play. I would let them get into stuff in the backyard, like play in the mud, like do whatever, paint yourself. I don't care. Yeah. I do allow a lot of like messy kind of things because I just wasn't allowed to do that as a kid, and like my eldest loves that kind of thing. Yeah. So I'm relaxed about it. It doesn't bother me if an activity only takes 5 minutes to clean up, but it gives them 20 minutes of enjoyment like that. It doesn't stress me out, but it stresses Josh's out.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's what's funny is because, like, and I've asked his mum this. I said to his mum, like, did you let Josh do, like, messy stuff as a kid? And she was like, no. Always I would say, like, don't make a mess, don't make a mess, don't make it. And it's, like, the first thing out of his mouth, like, any kind of thing, like, don't make a mess, don't make a mess. So he would get so stressed out if I'm, like, letting them get messy. But I'm relaxed. But, like, I wouldn't say I'm permissive either. Like, if it's something that I'm not going to allow, I'm not going to let them do it. I'm not going to let them get away with it. But, yeah, it's just... I mean, we've got 3 of them. You kind of got to pick your battles. Like, you can't be in charge of everything that goes on when you've got 3 little people to please. And, like, Josh worked away when I had Bodhi, so the girls had to kind of do things by themselves when I'm like trying to put them to sleep or whatever. So
Yeah.
they're pretty good, and they don't usually do things that they're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm strong, and I think I get stuff done because part of me has that control aspect. Like, I grew up living in a house that, I know people think OCD means really clean, but I grew up in a house that was never clean.
Yeah.
She cleaned before I came along, but like I said, it went the other way, and it was
unbearable,
messy and dirty and cluttered, and clutter just like stresses me the hell out now. Like, I can't handle having too much clutter. I get rid of stuff a lot, and then I get rid of stuff before I'm done using it, and then I have to buy it again, and that kind of thing, which is annoying. But so it did affect me in that way. But so some people say that I'm a bit too like obsessed with cleaning. Like, Josh is always like, who cares, it'll get done tomorrow. And I'm like, but I want it done today because I like to look at it and see that it's clean, you know. Like,
and you're probably like, your mum was clean, but then she went the other way. But now you don't want to go the other way.
Exactly.
So you've mentally got to stay on top of it.
I didn't witness it when it was like that. Like, from
clean?
from what she says in the letter, it was like every surface was spotless. But that's not my memory. My memory is like clutter, not being able to touch things, like can't face sorting through paperwork, that kind of thing. So it wasn't so much like dirty.
Well, that was
it was more just like
stuff everywhere.
Merging into like hoarder territory.
Oh,
just
right.
like stuff everywhere because she couldn't bear to tackle it.
Yeah.
So it would just like pile up. There was just stuff everywhere. And like, my sister still lives in that house with my dad and her 3 kids and husband. Like, it's a full house.
Lordy.
And she's been doing like lots of work, still trying to, there's still trunks in there from when they moved from England, and that was 33 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, they never got through that stuff.
And is your sister disposing of these things, or?
It's been a two-way battle, because she'll come across stuff that she thinks they can get rid of, but then my dad will be like, oh no, I'll keep that, and then he like puts it in his room, and then she's like, now it's just in the house instead of in the trunks. Like, yeah, but yeah, she has been getting rid of stuff, but she's a lot more sentimental than I am.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm like, chuck it, but she's more like, but she's emotionally attached to a lot of it because it's from her childhood, whereas it had no meaning to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's just what it was like.
Wow, that must be... Sounds like you're kind of in a good place, aware and...
Like, more just like, I've accepted it as it was what it was, and there's never going to be closure about it.
Yeah, okay.
But like, OCD can be a really hidden disorder, and like, as with my mum, you can... You're okay? You can mask really well. Like, as far as... people were aware, they didn't know the extent of how bad it was, because I feel like if people actually knew how bad it was, like, my sister and I probably would have been removed.
Oh, okay.
But
did she voluntarily give you to your grandparents? Yes. Is that how that went?
Yeah, she chose to, and that was before she had any kind of diagnosis, so there was never kind of any investigation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so I do have the story that I mentioned that my mum wrote that I typed up, just to keep it. So I was just going to read it out now. So it was written in 2008. So I was 15 at the time, and she would have been just over 40? No, just over 50. Sorry,
that's bad.
So in the past 34 years, since the age of 16, I suffered a mental disorder known as Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. I have commands that things must be done a certain way. You know that no one could possibly know or understand what goes on in your head. You know that what you do is irrational, but you can't stop it. There is the impossible non-stop mental pain to endure, and it consumes every waking moment of every day. In 1993, after having lived with the disorder for 21 years, I finally had to seek help, and only managed this at my husband's insistence. Not just the person with the disorder suffers, the whole family experiences and suffers from it. Normal life literally comes to a standstill. Hold on. To sit and tell my doctor of this haywire condition after hiding it for so long was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I was referred immediately to a psychiatrist, sent on to a clinical psychologist who diagnosed severe obsessive compulsive disorder. The psychiatrist suggested I read a book entitled The Boy Who Couldn't Stop Working, and suddenly my pain, my confusion, my inability to have a life had a name. It was a disease and illness, and I wasn't going mad as I had begun to believe. The professional help we sought came just in time. We had at home a 5-month-old daughter who did not seem to be growing. Completely obsessed by the illness, I'd stopped caring properly for the baby. The commands came constantly to clean, clean, clean. The baby would cry and I would insist my husband comfort her, give her water. I couldn't stop. I couldn't even approach the baby while I was dirty. By the time the cleaning was done, I was too exhausted to eat, so even when I did feed the baby, there was very little milk for her. She was not growing the way she should have been. Our doctor, then unaware of the illness I kept such closely guarded secrets, sent us to a pediatrician who found nothing wrong with the baby, but that she was starved from being well below the normal weight for a healthy 5-month-old. He immediately prescribed formula, and totally unable to cope, I gave my daughter to my parents. They got the baby past crisis point and then raised her to the age of 6 years old. A beautiful schoolgirl who did not want to come home on a regular basis until 1999, after I had been in therapy for my illness for 6 years. At its worst, OCD completely consumes the sufferer's life. By the time we sought help, I felt there was nothing left of myself, just a robot that had to answer to the demands of the illness. I felt as if it had no emotions, no feelings, except hate and anger. For years I felt so angry at everything and yet at nothing. The compulsions can take many different forms. Some sufferers are obsessed with the need to clean, some with the need to check things, some have to count, some have to collect insignificant trivia, some collect rubbish. At the height of my illness, it would take us up to 3 hours to re-enter the home after having been out for the day. So intense was the fear of contaminating the home, and so incessant were the demands of the cleaning routines. Sometimes it would take me half the day to do one night's washing up. Sometimes I would get stuck in the bathroom for 4 or 5 hours, unable to stop working. I would often get stuck in a particular activity or thought pattern, and even though experiencing considerable discomfort because of this and having the desire to move on, I was completely unable to do so. I would emerge from the bathroom around midnight to find my husband in the chair asleep, and I would collapse into mine, too exhausted for us to even consider preparing a meal. Sometimes we would not eat for nights on end. All food had to be made from a tin or a packet. To even consider bringing vegetables or fruit into the home was impossible. However, in order to eat, I had to remember to take the tin of soup or beans to the shower with me to wash it. If this was not done, I couldn't touch the tin, nor could I tolerate my husband going to the cupboard to get one. He would comply because I would become totally hysterical if he attempted to do otherwise. I would be engulfed in an uncontrollable rage. I would find it so difficult to breathe. We lived on coffee and biscuits, although I would even find it difficult to open a packet of biscuits. Shopping would be difficult. I was terrified of supermarkets, the trolleys, the baskets, everything on the shelves. To me, it was all so dirty. Other shopping was very testing. I couldn't touch anything. Any new clothes, books, DVDs, toys always had to be washed before going into the home. I even had to wash a new bar of soap in case it might be dirty. Going out held no pleasure. I would do anything to keep us all inside, even if we were out of food. Riding on buses, sitting on seats, it filled me with dread. We couldn't even go for a walk or visit a park in case a dog had been there. My children would beg me to take them to a park, but it was agony for me. I would try and fight back against the thoughts, but they always won. I was completely unable to open my own front door for 15 years. Going outside would automatically mean getting dirty. If I had to go out the door, I would change into my dirty clothes, and afterwards I would change and shower. Many times I considered suicide. I saw it as the only way of getting peace, a quiet place away from the endless commands, rituals, obsessions, and compulsions. I was sure my husband and 2 young daughters would be better off without me. In the midst of all of this, we were also trying to raise our other daughter, a girl of 2. My mum had been looking after her, but once they took over our infant, our 2-year-old came home. She loathes my illness as much as I do and longs for the day when I will be better. They cannot have any friends visit. We cannot have anyone in the house. OCD has caused insufficient amounts of chemical serotonin in the basal ganglia section of the brain. Serotonin is a feel-good chemical, one that makes you feel like things are okay. OCD sufferers never feel okay. Their anxiety rules them. They worry and agonize over the minute details of any of their particular obsessions. I don't think anyone really understands the misery of it unless they have the misfortune to experience it. Even in sleep, there is no escape. Dreams often having a strong OCD content and causing one to wake up. One of the side effects of OCD is the sufferers also have to cope with a very deep and very real depression. There literally seems no point in living. At the height of my illness, when I didn't even know it was one, I would say to my husband, I go to bed unhappy and wake up depressed. The joy of having a new baby in the house was lost to the illness and its accompanying depression. I dreaded opening my eyes and seeing daylight, as it meant another day to fight my way through. Even the most mundane activities seemed like mountainous obstacles to overcome. OCD can respond to medication and to therapy. For the past 15 years, with the help of my doctor, psychological therapy, and the support of the appropriate medication, I feel as though I've been climbing a sheer cliff face on the road to recovery. A few times I've slipped and lost my foothold and nearly plummeted into the black abyss again. A sufferer certainly does not live a life, and you're not quite dead, although it seems more desirable. I can almost see the tuft of grass on the top of the cliff, and little by little I struggle to grasp them, to sit upon my own mountain and be mentally whole and well, to live again and try and recapture some of the 34 years that OCD stole from my life. I know I'm not alone. I know there are many other sufferers who spend each day of their life commanded by the hellish existence. My doctor keeps the story on file and gives it to any new patients presenting with symptoms of OCD in the hope it might help a little.
That's so sad.
So sad.
So sad.
Hey, Jenny.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, welcome. I really hope there is no one out there living in that kind of hell now.
Yeah.
I feel like it's obviously more common these days to speak out about it. I hope it is.
It's still interesting, and that while there might not be someone whose parent had OCD, there'll be someone like you who lived with their grandparents because their parents didn't have the ability, for whatever reason, to raise them. So
Yes.
I'm sure that someone will out there listen
I hope so.
and feel like they're not alone in their story as well.
Yes.
So thank you.
You're welcome.